Somewhere beneath the dense jungles of Peru, hidden in a network of caves that wind deep into the earth, lies what might be the most valuable treasure in human history. We're not talking about gold coins or jeweled crowns. According to historical records that have survived for centuries, this cache contains something far more extraordinary: an entire library of golden tablets, inscribed with the complete knowledge of a civilization that vanished before the Spanish conquistadors could destroy it. The treasure is said to fill 7 enormous caverns, each one packed with artifacts that could rewrite everything we understand about pre-Columbian America. Multiple expeditions have died searching for it. Some claim they got close, but in over 400 years, not a single piece has ever been recovered. This is the legend of the Llanganatis treasure, and if even a fraction of the historical accounts are true, it represents the greatest archaeological discovery that humanity has yet to make. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The story begins not with legends or myths, but with a real historical event that fundamentally altered the course of an entire civilization. In November of 1532, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro and his small force of roughly 168 men encountered the Incan Emperor Atahualpa in the highland town of Cajamarca. What happened next would become one of the most dramatic confrontations in colonial history. Through a combination of technological superiority, tactical deception, and sheer audacity, Pizarro's forces captured the emperor himself, taking him hostage before thousands of his own warriors. Atahualpa, desperate to secure his freedom, made an offer that would echo through the centuries. He promised to fill the room where he was held prisoner with gold, once over and twice over with silver. The room measured approximately 17 feet wide by 22 feet long. Atahualpa stated the gold would reach as high as a man could reach with his outstretched arm. This wasn't just an impressive ransom. It was an amount of wealth almost incomprehensible to the Spanish soldiers who stood guard over him. And remarkably, Atahualpa began to deliver on this promise. Word went out across the vast Incan Empire, and from every corner of the realm, llamas laden with gold began arriving in Cajamarca. Golden vessels, ceremonial objects, intricate jewelry, temple ornaments, and sheets of beaten gold torn from the very walls of sacred buildings made their way to the Spanish. Month after month, the treasure accumulated. Spanish records meticulously documented the arrival of this wealth, so we know this wasn't legend. It actually happened. But here's where the story takes its first mysterious turn. Historical accounts suggest that as this ransom was being assembled, Atahualpa's generals became aware of something troubling. They suspected, correctly, that the Spanish had no intention of honoring their agreement. The conquistadors would take the gold and kill the emperor anyway. Faced with this realization, the Incan leadership allegedly made a fateful decision. They would halt the remaining treasure shipments and hide the wealth that was still en route. According to various Spanish chronicles written in the decades following the conquest, the largest of these treasure trains was making its way from Cusco, the Incan capital, toward Cajamarca when it received the order to stop. This convoy, some accounts claim, carried not just the standard ransom of gold and silver, but also sacred objects from the very heart of Incan civilization. Items that represented not just wealth, but cultural and religious significance beyond measure. The question that has haunted treasure hunters for centuries is simple. What happened to this treasure train? In June of 1533, despite receiving an enormous ransom, Pizarro had Atahualpa executed. The justification was a rushed trial on charges of plotting against the Spanish, but the real motivation was transparently political. With the emperor dead, the Spanish consolidated their grip on the empire. But they also intensified their search for the rumored hidden wealth they believed had been spirited away. For the next several decades, as Spain systematically conquered and colonized the former Incan territories, stories persisted among the indigenous population about treasure that had been hidden in the remote mountains. The Spanish documented these rumors extensively, though they were never able to verify them. The conquistadors tortured countless indigenous people, trying to extract information about hidden gold, but either the victims genuinely didn't know, or they protected the secret to their deaths. The legend might have faded into obscurity, dismissed as wishful thinking by treasure-seeking Spaniards, except for one remarkable document that emerged in the 18th century. This is where our story shifts from colonial history into something far stranger. In 1760, a Spanish soldier named Valverde, whose first name appears in various accounts as either Fernando or Carlos, was living in poverty in the region of Llanganatis, a harsh and isolated mountain range in what is now Ecuador. Valverde was married to an indigenous woman, and as he lay dying, he dictated a letter to the Spanish king. In this letter, he claimed that his wife's family had shown him the location of the hidden Incan treasure. He described in detail how to reach it. The Valverde Derrotero, as this document became known, reads like a riddle wrapped in geographical descriptions. It speaks of starting from a specific mountain, traveling to a lake shaped like a pair of spectacles, following certain valleys, and eventually reaching a series of caves where the treasure lay hidden. Valverde described seeing piles of gold and silver stacked in caverns, along with golden statues and, most intriguingly, plates or tablets of gold inscribed with what he interpreted as writing or symbols. The Spanish crown took this letter seriously enough to organize expeditions, but the Llanganatis region is one of the most inhospitable places on earth. It's a land of perpetual mist, treacherous bogs that can swallow a person in minutes, sudden storms, and terrain so confusing that landmarks seem to shift. Early expeditions found nothing, and several people died in the attempt. But here's what makes the Valverde letter so compelling to historians. It contains specific geographical details that could only have been known to someone who had actually traveled through that region. It's not a vague treasure map. It's a precise set of directions that reference real landmarks. The problem is that the landscape has changed over the centuries. Lakes have drained or filled, earthquakes have altered mountains, and vegetation has reclaimed paths that might have once been clear. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the Llanganatis treasure became an obsession for a particular type of adventurer. Dozens of expeditions ventured into those mountains, each one convinced they had deciphered the Valverde Derrotero correctly. Some found intriguing evidence. In the 1880s, a British explorer named Barth Blake claimed to have found worked stone structures and evidence of ancient mining activity deep in the mountains. He returned multiple times, but never found the treasure itself. In the 1930s, another expedition discovered what appeared to be an ancient stone pathway leading into a particularly remote valley, but it disappeared into terrain too dangerous to follow. What's remarkable is that serious historians haven't dismissed the Llanganatis treasure as pure fiction. There are too many historical threads that connect back to documented events. We know the ransom was real. We know treasure trains were dispatched. We know the Spanish never recovered all the gold they believed existed. And we have multiple independent indigenous oral histories that speak of ancestors hiding sacred objects from the conquistadors. The question isn't whether the Incans hid wealth from the Spanish. The question is where, how much, and whether it still exists. In 1969, an American named Eugene Brunner launched one of the most thorough expeditions ever attempted. Brunner spent years researching the historical documents and studying the geography. He believed he had solved the riddle of the Valverde Derrotero. His expedition discovered carved symbols on rocks deep in the Llanganatis range, symbols that didn't match any known indigenous writing system. He found evidence of what appeared to be deliberately concealed caves. But before he could complete his search, The Ecuadorian government revoked his permit, and he was forced to leave. Bruner remained convinced until his death that the treasure was real and that he had been close to finding it. Modern archaeological perspective adds another layer to this mystery. We now understand that the Incan Empire had a sophisticated system of record-keeping using quipus, knotted strings that encoded information, but there are persistent accounts, including in the Valverde letter, that speak of golden tablets inscribed with knowledge. If such tablets exist and were hidden, they might contain information about Incan history, religion, science, and culture that was never recorded by Spanish chroniclers. The archaeological value would be incalculable, far exceeding the monetary worth of the gold itself. Some historians argue that if the treasure existed, it would have been found by now. The Llanganatis range, while remote, isn't completely unexplored. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and metal detection technology have all improved dramatically. Wouldn't someone have detected massive amounts of gold? But others point out that the treasure, if it exists, isn't sitting in an open field. According to the accounts, it's hidden in caves, possibly sealed or collapsed over the centuries. The mountains themselves are honeycombed with natural caverns formed by volcanic activity. Finding specific chambers in that labyrinth, especially if they were deliberately concealed, would be extraordinarily difficult, even with modern technology. There's also a darker possibility that treasure hunters rarely want to consider. The wealth might have been found centuries ago by someone who chose to keep the discovery completely secret, melting down artifacts and selling them gradually to avoid detection. In such a scenario, objects of immense historical importance would have been destroyed for their raw material value, and we would never know. Yet the search continues. Even today, small expeditions still venture into the Llanganatis, drawn by the same combination of historical evidence and human obsession that has driven seekers for 400 years. Ecuador has tightened regulations around treasure hunting, requiring extensive permits and mandating that any discoveries be treated as national patrimony rather than private property. This has reduced the number of expeditions but hasn't eliminated them. What makes the Llanganatis treasure so enduring as a historical mystery is that it sits at the intersection of documented history and tantalizing possibility. Unlike many treasure legends that rest entirely on folklore, this one is rooted in real events that we can verify. An emperor was captured, a ransom was collected, an execution occurred, and something happened to the wealth that was still in transit. The treasure, if it exists in anything resembling the form described in historical accounts, would transform our understanding of Incan civilization. It would provide primary source materials created by the Incans themselves, not filtered through the perspective of Spanish conquerors. It would offer archaeological context that could answer questions historians have debated for generations. But there's something else worth considering. Perhaps the greatest treasure isn't gold at all. Perhaps it's the historical mystery itself, the way this story has preserved Incan resistance against colonization in the popular imagination. The idea that the conquistadors, despite all their violence and greed, never fully claimed what they sought, that somewhere the knowledge and wealth of a destroyed civilization remains hidden on its own terms, speaks to something deeper than simple treasure hunting. The Llanganatis Mountains still guard their secrets. The mist still rolls through those valleys, obscuring paths and landmarks, just as it did when Valverde claimed to walk among golden hordes. Modern Peru and Ecuador contain thousands of archaeological sites that haven't been excavated. New discoveries about Incan engineering, agriculture, and culture emerge regularly. The possibility that one of those discoveries could lead to the legendary hidden treasure remains very real. Whether the greatest treasure never found is actually sitting in 7 caverns beneath an Ecuadorian mountain, or whether it exists now only as fragments in historical documents and indigenous memory, the search itself has become part of history. It reminds us that the past isn't fully known, that mysteries remain, and that sometimes the most valuable things are precisely those that remain just beyond our reach, keeping us curious, keeping us searching, and keeping alive the knowledge that history still has secrets to reveal.